Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final session of the day. Last but not least, very excited to be joined by Beamery's Lyndsey Scott to talk about her introduction to React. Just a quick one before I pass over. As with all of these sessions, if you have questions throughout, let us know in the chat. I think there's going to be a point kind of halfway and at the end for questions, so don't be shy. If you're watching back, you can always ask on Discord. They've got their own channel. And also you can follow their hub on Showcode for all the latest kind of updates, career opportunities and things like that. I'll be sure to post a link for that in the chat now. But without further ado, I'll pass over to Lindsey and let me know if you need anything.
Sweet, let me get started. I'm gonna share my screen, which did not work about 30 seconds before this started, but luckily we have fixed it now. Cool. Alex, can you verify you can see my screen okay?
Yes, all good.
Sweet. Okay, cool. Let's get started. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming along. I hope everyone is as excited for the Athena hack at the weekend as I am. I've been a participant at the past and I'm super excited to be sponsoring with Beamery this year, and it's going to be a great weekend. So hopefully we'll see some of you in person there. So my name is Lindsey. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior engineer at Beamery, which is a talent lifecycle management platform. So what that actually means is that we make some of the software that some of the biggest companies in the world use for the whole journey of recruitment. So that's from attracting applicants, the data management and visualization of those candidates, all the way through to internal mobility within those companies. So my work, I'm a full stack engineer, but mostly experienced in front end and then particularly in React. And at Beamery, I worked in a product delivery team initially after I finished the bootcamp. And I worked on core parts of the web application there, largely React apps. And now I work in the office of the CTO team, where I work on technical discovery and prototyping on newer product ideas. So a bit about me. I didn't come from a computer science background. I did a little bit of coding at uni in my degree in physics, but I actually really hated it at the time and I thought I was terrible at it. But luckily, I did a web development course with Code First Girls outside of uni, and I loved that. And that was what really drove me to become a software engineer. I think having that start at uni with some of not great teaching has made me really determined to try and give back and teach. And one of the things I love about being a software engineer is the constant learning and knowledge sharing amongst engineers. And I want to make sure that we're not gatekeeping information and we're trying to encourage as many people as possible to be able to learn to code, so we can have a much more diverse range of people who can become developers, because truly anyone can. So yeah, outside of work now, I teach the web development course that I originally took with Code First Girls. So I've come full circle with that, which is really nice. And also have been a mentor for first-time teachers at CFG. And I've just started mentoring with Coding Black Females as well. And I'm also lucky to be able to teach and mentor at our bootcamp at Beamery as well. So let's get into it. So we're going to do a brief intro into React today. And for context, the level I'm going to aim this at is people with a little bit of JavaScript experience, or anyone with more experience who hasn't been able to work with React yet. The bad news is there's absolutely no chance we can get through all of React in 45 minutes, but I'm going to cover what I think to be the most important parts that should give you a springboard to be able to go and learn and build React apps. So we're going to cover the why, the what, and the how of why we're using frameworks like React and why they are the industry standard in the world of web development. So to start with, let me cover what a JavaScript framework is in the first place. So for most of you, you probably know that using purely HTML, CSS, and JavaScript gives you all that you need to be able to make a really great website or web app. And even within those, there's so much to learn and master. You could study CSS until you're blue in the face and you still wouldn't know everything about it. But when we start to build more complex web applications, more logic, more pages, more behavior that we want to make our web app do, it starts to become a bit more messy and harder to do this with just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Is it possible to build it with just that? Absolutely. But it becomes much harder to manage, a lot of files, and a lot longer to build out as a developer. So enter JavaScript frameworks. This is why we have them. So they give us the tools and the scaffolding to be able to build applications quickly. And we're talking about building quickly as a developer, spending a lot less time in it, and also making applications that actually load and work faster as well. And we can scale our apps in a way that is much easier to manage. When we're dealing with bigger amounts of data as well, we need to be able to manage and keep track and manipulate that data. A lot of frameworks provide with easier ways to manage data and events in our apps. And all of that combined means that we have much, much less repetition. I don't need to repeat my code as much and create lines and lines that do exactly the same thing. With frameworks, I can create nice little building blocks of code that I can use again and again and use these to make my apps much more quickly. Using something like React means that I can build out an application without having to repeat the same configuration and setup and code time and time again. And I can jump into writing the code that I actually want to write. With frameworks as well comes an entire ecosystem of extra tools and packages to help even more. And all of that makes the developer's life much, much easier. But ultimately, it helps us create better quality applications, which run quicker, make our users happier, and can do much more complex things. So, for a little bit of context, there's lots of different options alongside React, and they all have their own different pros and cons. And as you can see by the stats on the right, which come from the JavaScript Rising Stars report from 2021, they measure the amount of GitHub stars and usage of repos, and React comes out as the most popular. And as you can imagine, there's loads of different ways that you can measure popularity, like job descriptions for developers, setting frameworks as required skills. But largely, React, Angular, and Vue come out as consistently the most used and popular. And Svelte is kind of the new kid on the block, and it's also rising in popularity pretty quickly as well. Also, very relevant to mention the origin of these frameworks in the first place. So React was created and maintained by Facebook. Angular was created and maintained by Google. Vue was made by a Google engineer, but it's independent, and Svelte is open source. And we often talk a lot about open source when talking about these frameworks. And even though some of them have core teams that are owned by private companies, a lot of the libraries, the packages are most popular that really support these frameworks are open source and they're built by the developer community. And they're a fantastic thing to get involved with. If you want to become more aware and get involved in open source things, there's countless opportunities for you to be able to contribute to these packages. Cool. So I've talked a little bit about the benefits of frameworks. Let's have a little bit of balance and talk about the downsides. So the main problems I want to flag, which are the most important for React beginners, is that, as I've mentioned, vanilla JavaScript is really powerful on its own. And if you're making a website with a couple of pages, you probably don't need React. Unless you're doing something really, really complex, you don't need to over-engineer what you're doing for a very simple web page and a web project. The learning curve is another important thing to consider. Switching to use frameworks can add a lot of time and things to learn alongside it, with new libraries, new configuration. Alongside the new syntax, you need to be able to code in these frameworks. And that can add a lot of time in itself to write what you need. And I think the biggest one that I really wanted to flag is that web development is constantly changing and updating, and what was popular 5 to 10 years ago might be dead in the coming years. So it's important not to tie yourself too much to a particular technology as a beginner, and to understand that core JavaScript that powers these frameworks, and that is what the foundation is for all of them. And that's what ultimately is going to help you keep learning and be able to pivot when these technologies naturally will change. So yeah, it might be tempting to have a look at job descriptions, what's popular in industry, and be like, aha, like learning React is what's going to get me a job, so I'm just going to dive in and learn it, and I'm not going to understand everything that goes around it, that is the building blocks. But if you don't understand what native web events are, or the life cycle of a web page, and that core JavaScript that React is using and built on, your understanding of the framework will never be complete. Cool. So let's get on to React. So we can talk a little bit about why it's been so popular. There's not a one event or reason you can pin down into why React is the most popular or one of the most popular frameworks. It was created in 2013, which probably doesn't sound that new, but in the context of web development changing so quickly, has been around for a little bit for now. And if you Google why React is popular, simplicity and flexibility is the answer that you're probably going to get. And that's what makes it so appealing compared to its competitors. So it allows developers, and what we mean by that flexibility is it's allowing developers to have control over their choices and their architecture within the app, and a lot of developers like that. And if you pair that with the community support, which is incredible, and the extra power that other React packages bring with it, so like Redux, which is a state management package, it gives a lot of potential to build the app that is really right for what you want to do. And I think that's why so many developers really love working with it. It's often described as simple to learn, but I would say I think the jury's out on that one. I've had a lot of beginners and people in bootcamp say to me that they found it one of the harder things to get your head around. And it is an entirely new way to be thinking about things. But I think also that's a lot to do with the packages and the technologies that surround React rather than the core React knowledge itself. Cool. So to make sure that we're all on the same page before we talk about the mechanics of React, let's just go over the DOM a little bit. And every time I have to teach the DOM in Code for Skills classes, I'm always like, oh, this is the most abstract concept. And I have to go in to be like, okay, it's a tree and it's got parents and those parents have children and it's got siblings. And it is quite an abstract concept. So don't worry if you're not really hot on knowing exactly how it works. But the core part is that, so the DOM is the document object model. It's representing that UI, that tree of elements within your application. And in a standard vanilla JavaScript interaction, every time there's a change in the state of your application UI, so I'm triggering an event, I'm creating an element, that DOM is getting updated to represent that change. The catch is that if you're manipulating the DOM a lot, that's going to affect your performance and make it slowly. Because every time you change something, the children of whatever you're changing are also going to change as well. And that's going to cause a re-render of the page and of that element. So the more components you have, the more expensive all of your DOM updates could be. So you can imagine if you're updating something that has loads of child components, they are going to be need to be re-rendered for every DOM update. And as we start to build more complex applications, that can become quite expensive, and we start to see that performance hit when we use just vanilla JavaScript. So enter the virtual DOM. So the concept of the virtual DOM is what React is built on and how it uses a slightly different way in order to be able to check what's changing in your application. So the virtual DOM is a representation of the DOM that React uses in order to determine what to tell the DOM to change. So in this diagram, I'll show you. And I think this diagram, again, I think it could be a little bit clearer to understand, but hopefully you can see what's going on. If I'm changing something, what happens in the virtual DOM is I'm not changing the virtual DOM compared to the DOM. I'm changing the virtual DOM versus a previous version of the virtual DOM. And then when I've decided that there's changes there or multiple changes, that's when I'm going to re-render the virtual DOM and communicate with the DOM. So that might sound like I'm doing double the work, right? So I'm changing the virtual DOM and I still have to change the DOM. But the core part to remember here is that the virtual DOM will batch updates to the DOM to update the UI. So that means that we're not having those same problems where all of the children are getting updated and they're all getting updated all of the time. It means that the communication is much more performant. I'm only updating it when I have changes, and those changes are happening in batches rather than every single time. So that's why we have a more performant app when we're using things like the virtual DOM using frameworks like React. So that's a lot of words, and the DOM is quite tricky to think about. So let's try and visualize this a little bit easier. So I'm going to be using illustrations here from an artist called Maggie Appleton, who you might be familiar with if you've done any Egghead courses. I think they are amazing, and they really blew my mind when I saw them because she is able to visualize what's going on in React so much better than some of the docs and articles will ever be able to. Amazing, especially if you're a visual thinker and you like to be able to visualize how things are working. She has a talk called React as a Potato, which I'll link in the Discord afterwards. But it's a really great, it uses all of these images to explain how all of these things are happening. But yeah, having a look at this image, what we want to think about when we're using a React app. So our backend is doing stuff over there, holding all our content, giving us all our data. The React app is communicating with our virtual DOM here, which is our tree of UI elements, batching those results and then sending it to the DOM when we need to. And then when we're having events in our browsers, and events, FY, clicks, changes, anything to do with that, those are communicated back to the React app, and then we're going back in our circle again. React app will communicate to the virtual DOM that something's changed. After that, then we can communicate to our DOM. Cool. So how do we actually write the code in React itself? So React uses syntax, which we call JSX, to write our React components. And as you can see by the diagram here, JSX allows us to combine what we would normally write in separate HTML and markup and JavaScript together. So we can write our logic, our behavior, our event handling, and our elements in the same place, which is so handy. And I'm going to get you to write a little bit of this in a second. So this is a React component that we're writing, and you can see that I'm combining a little bit of JavaScript. I've got this variable, and I'm able to feed that directly into my HTML component here, which is my React component, and it's written like a standard function. So yeah, we spiral this together into our vanilla JavaScript. Cool. So this is an example of this a little bit further in the code. And the key thing to remember here is that React use declarative code and not imperative code. And what those two words mean is an example of an imperative would be, if I'm going to tell you how to get to my house, I'm going to say, turn left, turn right, then walk up to the door. If I'm telling you how to do that in a declarative way, I'm saying, this is my address. So this is what React is doing. So in vanilla JavaScript, I'm like, do this, create this element, make this, assign this, and then append that, and then add it to my root. When I'm doing this declaratively in React, I'm like, this is my element, do it. It's much easier to read because you're telling React exactly what you want to be rendered, rather than having a set of instructions that are being interpreted by the DOM. So it's a little bit easier to read once you're used to React, is that you know exactly what you're telling the browser to do. Cool. Another small part here is that the file extensions change. So we're using .jsx instead of .js. And we need to think about how we actually compile and how we transform that code. So for a framework, we always have to remember that everything has to be converted back into vanilla JavaScript for it to work in the browser. And again, this might sound a little bit counterintuitive. If I'm writing something and then I'm converting it back into these like DOM events that are vanilla JavaScript, sounds like you're adding time there. But that's a lot to do with how these events are communicated, as I've said, with the batched events and the virtual DOM. So you are saving time, but you do have to convert it back into that vanilla JavaScript because that's the only thing that all browsers understand. And for this, we need a tool and a technology to be able to convert it back. And in React, we use Babel. And you can look at the illustration to visualize how that works. But Babel is a compiler, which is changing everything into this universal ES5 notation of JavaScript that the browser is going to understand and be like, cool, I understand what you're asking me to do with this. And Babel is not the only compiler that we can use, but is one of the more popular ones. But again, we can go into Babel and it's generally quite complex, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But the most important thing here is to remember that our browser is not going to interpret this JSX code as it is. We do need to do some work to convert it back to that. Cool. So now we're going to spend some time actually writing some React components. So if you scan this QR code on the screen now, I'll leave this up for 30 seconds just so you can scan it.
Just a quick one while we're waiting for people to scan as well. There was a question, and you mentioned actually the Egghead series. So I don't know if that kind of helps answer it, but just sort of the best places to go, I guess, to learn React for, I think someone knew Angular and was keen to kind of start learning a bit more about React. So are there specific kind of resources you'd recommend, or places that you think that you could go, or you know, advice?
Yes, definitely. So Egghead is a good one. There's a guy called Kenzie Dodds who makes amazing React content. And the React team at Facebook themselves have updated the React docs recently. and they have a lot of like embedded tutorials and illustrations within the React docs, and they're really fantastic. Like they're some of the best documentation that I've read. So I recommend just going through them as well. Sweet.
Thank you
Okay,
very much.
hopefully you've had a chance to scan that, and you should be opening up this code sandbox here. So what we've got here is Code Sandbox as well, if you're not familiar with it, is just like a virtual editor that we can use in browser. And I've got a little React app that's set up here. And as you can see, this hopefully will be a little bit familiar now with this GSS syntax, but you can recognize all your friends, this HTML tags that are down here. And we've got a little component up here, which is my component. So what I want to do now is just give you 5 minutes to have a go at writing your own React components and seeing if you can render them. So the core things that we have to know about this is that we've got these little guys wrapped around it, and these are called React fragments. And we use these to wrap multiple elements together. So if I wanted to add an extra element in here, then this wraps them together nicely. And if I want to render my React component, this is how I do it down here, and you should see it down here. So this is just your classic HTML syntax of just a self-closing tag, and that's how I'm rendering my component down at the bottom. And if I were to inspect this with the developer tools in Chrome here, these are not my errors, by the way, these are Code Sandbox errors. But your tags that you can see are rendered down at the bottom here. And you can see that they're appended and in the DOM as we would expect them to. So yeah, I'll give it about 5 minutes and then have a go at this. Ask any questions in the chat and in the channel while you do this. And if you want to post a picture of your React element on the browser in our channel, that would be excellent as well. So yeah, go for it. I will sit in silence for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And yeah, just to touch on what Lindsey was saying, but obviously with the Beamery channel on Discord as well, I think it's a good opportunity, whether it's 5 minutes working on it now, whether it's kind of afterwards, to have a go, post a few screenshots and let us know how you're doing and how you've got on. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask a few questions, don't be afraid to get involved, and yeah, let us know how you go on. And we have, while we're waiting in the background, there has actually been another question in the chat that says, so JSX is basically a way to represent HTML elements using JavaScript, i.e. a HTML div as a JavaScript variable / function? Question.
Yes, kind of as well. And then within that as well, so we can reference our own components. So you're making these components as like a JavaScript function, and then I'm calling them like a HTML element. So like if you go back to the little image here, so it's like a combination of them both. So yeah, spot on. But it allows you to combine that syntax that you're familiar with in a way that you can use JavaScript more heavily in the files that you're making.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Like I say, keep them coming if there's anything that you're wondering or struggling with getting on with the thing. And I've posted a link to that sandbox as well for anyone unable to scan it or anything. So hopefully everyone should be able to give it a go. While people are cracking on with that as well, Lindsay, just I had a question looking through that and trying to grasp my way through the DOM structure and everything you were talking about. How long did it sort of take you to grasp things like React? I guess it depends at kind of like what stage you're doing it, but how quick can it be to learn? You said that different people obviously have had different experiences, but for you, was it relatively quick?
I think so. I did it as part of like a boot camp when I learned it. So I'd done my building blocks of JavaScript, of HTML and CSS, and I think I spent about 2 weeks on React, which was like every day on React, and building up from this level, which is like my intro, being able to write the files and some basic apps, up to like the full state management and being able to build like slightly more complex things. And I think that was the part that I found really difficult, and it definitely took a little bit longer to resonate with me. But I think there's so much to learn in terms of what you can do, but to be able to make apps that are working similarly in React and the same capabilities as you'd be able to make on the more complex side of a web page doesn't take a huge amount of time. But with all of these technologies, like the limit does not exist of how much you could learn about it. So when you start to incorporate more difficult like event handling and thinking about performance in particular, that's the stuff that takes years to be able to, I think, learn properly. And given, as I've said, things update all of the time, new like methods are added, things are changed, etc. That stuff is constantly updating. So yeah, you can spend like a limitless amount of time learning it. But I think for a beginner, like a couple of sessions, you should be able to get up and running with a decent app.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to say it's something that I'll give it a go myself and see how long it takes, but I'll probably need to be in more of a like you said, a boot camp scenario, I guess, helped where you're using it every day for like 2 weeks to
Yeah, for sure. And then combining that with TypeScript, etc., and then other things to compare it to, that can take a little bit as well.
we'll see how many people use it at the weekend in the hackathon.
This is always the strangest part I find of teaching any sort of workshops remotely compared to like in person, because normally you could walk around, you could see what people are doing, if they're getting on with it, but you just have to trust the silence here, and hopefully people are plugging away at their own components.
We'll take the lack of questions in the chat as a good sign, like the classic silence is good in these scenarios
Yeah.
is what we're hoping. But yeah, if there is anything obviously questions wise, then do let us know. But yeah, it must be an odd experience. Like you say, the biggest transition from like in person to virtual in that respect is rather than checking out how it's going, just sitting here and hoping for the best.
Yes, definitely. Sweet. I think we're almost approaching 5 minutes there. So don't worry if you're still working away at that. So what I would just want to cover quickly is this next one down, which is the props here. So props are a really key part of React, and this is all to do with how we use our data and how we communicate via all of our different components and elements. So you can see it's a similar function syntax that I'm using, and I'm providing this prop here. And when I say prop is short for property. So I'm providing a property for this component that I want it to have. And that is just your arguments as you would normally use in a function. And for this one here, I've got my little fragments, and I'm just rendering this as plain text. And I'm using the curly braces here, which is just because it's a variable and that's how I'll render it. But I could wrap this round in any other elements in order to wrap it. And then if I wanted to render this on the page, I can do it here, and you can see that's coming up now. And then the syntax is really similar, but I'm providing this prop as you would do with any sort of prop that you would have on like a HTML element, but it's my custom prop here. I can call this anything I want, any argument name that you want, and I'm providing the data here. If I'm providing something as a string, as in a string syntax, any other data type, I need to wrap some curly braces around it in order to provide that. But again, if I look in my DOM tree, you can see it's provided as a text element and is rendered as expected there. But yeah, this is the most basic example of how props are communicated. But as we build into things that are more complex, how these props are communicated between parents and children obviously increases a lot. So my parent component, so I've got my, like the biggest parent here is obviously the app itself. I would want to be able to trickle that prop down to any of the smaller ones I could give it to. And then, yeah, that's how our data is flowing from top to bottom, is providing these props of saying I'm fetching the API in this component here, and I want to be able to pass it to all of the children of that component. And it's just providing that little prop title here and passing that down as I would do in a React component. Cool. So if you want to have another maybe like 2 minutes to write a component and maybe add a second prop into this, then go ahead, and then we can go on to the last part of the workshop.
Yeah, there was just a quick question in the meantime as well, so I think good to kind of give it a couple of minutes. But if there's around any best practices to manage Code.js and HTML.
Ooh, good question. As in how to write it or to...
So it's what is best practice to manage Code.js and HTML? So I guess if it's
Okay, so I'll interpret that as in terms of like writing and structuring your file with HTML and JavaScript. So I think there's loads of different ways that people love to structure things. The best one, and again, I'll post all of the like links in the chat at the end, is people often use atomic structure for writing your apps. And that is meaning separating everything out so you don't have this one huge file that's got all of your logic of what's happening when you're handling all of your events, what's happening in all of the logic and all your displaying, and every single element you need. We want to be able to split it up into a way that feels more sensible. So using things like atomic components separates out just my building blocks, so like maybe like my button component, and right up into like a full page, which is a bigger component. And I store those in separate files so I can use them as I need in those bigger files. And then any logic that is specific to those elements and that behavior sits with them, or anything that's generic can be factored out and put in a different file. So hopefully that answers your question. But I think the biggest thing that is good to structure these is to try and separate your logic and just your plain things that are being rendering, and try and make anything as reusable as it can be, so that it reads and you can build on it and change it and scale it if you want to. So yeah, an example here would be like if I wanted to, if I had a specific like event or anything like that that I wanted to handle for, I would maybe not want to be setting anything that was like really specific within a larger file. I'd want to be keeping things that are specific to a particular element together. So like if I only click on this one button, I want this one particular action that nothing else in my app is going to be able to do. Makes sense for that to sit. But if I had like the same click handler that everything that was going to be able to be clickable wanted to do, makes sense for that to sit so it can be used in a common place by everything.
Sounds good, thank you. And hopefully that answers the question, but let us know if it didn't. But yeah, cool. Thank you very much.
Sweet. Okay, I will continue on with this. Cool. So we're coming up to the end a little bit of this. So I want to think about if you are going to start using React from a basic thing and just using these basic components, how you will be able to do that in Athena Hack. So as I've mentioned, when we use things like JSX, we need some compilers in order to be able to convert that back into our vanilla JS. So if I'm making a React app, obviously I can't just write my JSX and expect the browser to know what that is. So if I'm doing setup within an app, I do need some files which do that for me, which is telling the files, hey, this file that's JSX, hey, this file that's JavaScript that has React code, this is how you're going to convert it and show it in the browser. So if you want to do that from scratch, I have a little tester repo out here. And this is also a really fun fact. If you change the URL of github.com to github.dev, you will have your web editor set up here. And then I can visualize my files in a way that's much easier to read through a GitHub repo. So I've mentioned Babel before, which is our compiler, and we also have something called Webpack. So Webpack is a bundler. So what that's doing is going through all of your files that you have in your app and your project, figuring out all of the dependencies that have. So that might be other files, it might be packages you've imported, and it's creating modules for them as a single kind of entry point that then will be used. So I've got this little example repo on my GitHub, and what it's doing is just talking through the config that you would need in order to be able to make a basic React app that compiled. And you need a lot of like little Babel presets, which are like things that just like how to use Babel and React together versus Babel and something else. And I've stepped through step by step to try and explain what's going on with them. And Webpack as well, trying to explain what's going on with a lot of these things. But the most important part is that a lot of people are not doing these. So previously, like a couple of, like when I say a couple of years ago, in my lifetime as a developer, 3-4 years, Webpack and Babel have become a little bit more black box. They work straight out of the box, and you don't need to do a huge amount of config if you want to make something just to get going with. As you build up and as you incorporate different things, you're probably going to need to do some more Babel and Webpack config. But the most common examples of setting an app and apps don't actually use them. They use them under the hood, but you don't need to know how they work in order to be able to get up and running. So React starters are the most common example of this. And they're also a great example of what I'm talking about when I say that React tooling, the technologies, the open source packages that surround React are really useful, and Create React App is a perfect example of this. So this is a starter. You need to run one command in your terminal and you can make a basic React app to get up and going with. So I can show you what that looks like. So if I run this command here, which is just npx, which is my package manager, creating React app, and then my syntax here is just the name of my app after this. This is how easy it is to make a basic React app to start off with. And you can also use a couple of different presets or like templates with this. So you can make it from TypeScript to start off with if you use TypeScript, etc., and it will build it. And here's one I prepared earlier. So this is the exact output of what Create React App does for you, which is this basic app. And it's got like a little bit of in styling, etc., which is just like the logos from React, nothing crazy. But you'll notice that there's no Babel and there's no Webpack files in this. So this is why I included this, is that if you were to just use Create React App out of the box, you might not realize that this is really important until you hit compiling errors when you try to build this app. So it's really good and important to know that these are core parts of how this compiling is working, even if you're not using them in your basic starters, because when you run into problems, make more complex apps, you will start to need to know how these configs work a little bit more. But to start off with, for using Create React App, it takes away all that need for you, which is fantastic. So yeah, would recommend using something like Create React App if you want to make something like this in Athena Hack. But that comes with a warning, which is, should you? So I think I want to refer back to what I said about at the start about thinking of the downsides of using JavaScript technologies. So think about what you're building and if React is the right choice for it. So if you're building a one-page website, is React the right choice for that? Probably not. You can probably build a really, really sick one just using JavaScript and HTML and some CSS. But if you want to use it so you can gain exposure to React and build an app and just have that where a simple kind of conversion into something that you know, fantastic, go for it. But I think it's really important to be thinking about these technical and architectural choices from the start rather than just blindly running into using React when you want to, because then you can start to make bigger decisions when you're using technologies like this and use the right choice for the right thing and not over-engineer things that don't need to be overly complex. And as I said, learning React can come with a learning curve. So if you're trying to do something quickly, like in a hackathon, using a new technology that you might have a lot of problems with might not be the best decision, or it might be a fantastic idea to be able to gain that exposure and like run headfirst into using a technology. But that's completely up to you. That's just my warning for that. Cool. So I'm on to any final questions with any of that.
Thank you very much, and I like the warning that comes with, yeah, the potential pitfalls of using something for the first time. While it's great to throw yourself in, but yeah, think about what you're using it for. And I think probably applies to quite a lot outside of React as well. So yeah, if you have any questions, let us know in the chat now. Make sure to make the most of the Discord channel as well if you're watching it back. So whether it's posting screenshots of what you've done in React, whether it's kind of questions that you have off the back of this session, yeah, Beamery have their own channel on there, and you can kind of take advantage of that. So don't worry if you can't necessarily think of anything now, but there's plenty of resources to ask at the end as well. I think just while we're kind of waiting for a couple to come in as well, a huge thank you to you, Lindsey. I think, like you say, it's great having had you as a competitor at Athena Hack last year, that you're so involved again this year. So thanks a lot for giving up your time just in general with it, but this session especially. Hopefully everyone's found it insightful, and like I say, I'll be excited to see how many people use React over the weekend.
Of course. And yeah, ask any questions in the Beamery Discord as well. I'll be there, and we have other front end engineers who are happy to answer any of your questions. And on the days themselves, if you decide to use React, we will be your front of line support to be able to help with that. So don't worry. And yeah, I think any further questions, feel free to ask. But someone already asked the question, which I would have covered, which is what can I do next? So React Docs, fantastic. Egghead courses, really great. Kent C. Dodd's content, also really excellent. React content. And then there literally is a myriad of articles online about React that you can jump into. But yeah, if you feel like you're hot on React components and being able to render them, I think being able to think about browser events like clicks and handling all of those events in React is the perfect next stage to do from that. So that's what I would recommend as the next step.
Sounds good, and we'll post some of those resources in the Discord as well, so that everyone can come and find out. And like I say, have that kind of portal. Doesn't look to be any questions in the chat, so I think we can call it a day there. And then yeah, like we say, there's always other avenues to get us, and you'll be there over the weekend as well. So can ask questions in person, and if you've sold them down the river, then they can blame you. There you go, real life. But no, like I say, a big thank you to you, Lindsey, for giving up your time. Big thank you for everyone listening. And hopefully it's been useful, and hopefully we see you at the weekend. Thank you, everyone.